Greetings, soul siblings. Welcome to Soul Perspective, a podcast about spirituality with me, Nick Brown. Each Sunday we'll see a new show delving and diving into thoughts and ideas relating to spiritualism and the spiritual movement as a whole. Sometimes I may even have a guest joining me. So sit back, relax, or stand and do the ironing, whatever floats your boat. If you're looking for an honest take on spirituality, mediumship, and religious philosophy, without always being too serious, you have come to the right place. Well, let's get right into it. Today, I'd like to talk about frustration, confusion, and division. And although this is something that's pretty wide in the social world, in society itself, there's also a lot of it in the spiritual and spirituality field, really. It seems quite surprising and shocking and horrific for someone who's been in this way of life 25 years now, to think that there are so many divisions and frustrations. Confusion, yeah, you get that a lot. I think that confusion happens no matter where you are or what you're involved in. Because at the end of the day, especially in this way of life, when you're dealing with things that are not necessarily the common herd, the norm, you are going to get some confusion. But it's how you deal with it that really, really matters, in my view. But within the spiritual realms these days, there's been a lot of intermixing of ideas, and I'm not necessarily or entirely against that, actually. I think mixing it up is good. It's, again, how we deal with that. For example, when I first started in this way of life, it was spiritualism is, this is spiritualism and nothing else. But as people have grown and learned and studied, which is always important, they've taken on board attributes of other ways of life and other thoughts. And that can only be a good thing until that moment where the other thing or the different thing is right and everything else is wrong. See, this is the one thing that we tend to forget about working with spirit. When it comes to spiritual development and spiritual growth, it's very much about spirit having reached out to us for thousands of years, giving us ideas, thoughts, perspectives, giving us information and ways of understanding things. And they are all very much given from the perspective of those spirit people that are giving it, but also in a way that the medium can understand it. Which means that, for example, when it comes to ways of healing, it might be given to one medium in one way, in another medium another way. And you know what? So long as the end result is healing, who cares how that way of working is done, so long as it is safe, so long as it is done the right way in terms of common sense and decency, then it's absolutely fine. But when you then flip that on the side and say, well, actually, no, the way you're doing it is wrong, that's when it stops being spirit and all about the individual. And that's where we find ourselves really in this way of life and in the spiritual movement as a whole, is this toing and froing between who's right and who's wrong. Every time that conversation comes up, who says, why don't we ask spirit? I do it frequently, but I don't say it out loud because in the past when I've had my head bitten off. But the point is, we are here to serve spirit. We're here to work for spirit. We're here to work for each other and to help grow and learn in that environment of open debate and development. So when it comes to a situation where someone turns around and says, oh, you shouldn't do it like that, you can't do it like that, then I start to question the motive behind that. And I suppose a root behind, at least a small root, if not a larger one, a root behind all this is the quest for individuality and the contradictions that we face within that quest and within spirituality, because we all have a need to be different. We all have a desire to stand out from the crowd, social media age especially. All of the development and research that I've put into this particular podcast, how to get it out there, where to post it, how to advertise it, all the build-up and the hype that you can come up with, so a little bit of mystery. It's all about getting seen. So there's this need to be different, and there's this desire to be seen as different, to stand out and stand above almost. But then there's also this desire to fit in. We all have this within us, an inherent desire to be part of something. I think that personally for me, that desire to be part of something is again part of our connection to the spirit realm and a part of our being part of that divine energy, that little spark of the great spirit that's within each one of us, is that desire to reconnect. But equally, to be different, to be individual, it is just as important and just as part of the divine. But we live in quite a polarized world. We live in quite a polarized society. So it goes from being myself in a group to being the best in the biggest group. And that really doesn't track with me in terms of spirituality. And it's a shame, because there are many good people out there who have been led down a path, shall we say, because they have been directed by people that they trust to believe certain things. And I have to admit, I want to talk about starseeds. It's something that's coming up an awful lot on social media, because of course you can even get an app now that will tell you which starseed you are. Of course, the original idea is there's a few starseeds among us, and now there's more, and now everybody is one apparently, because people grab hold of these concepts and run with them and add to them and play with them, and not having any respect or interest in researching the origins of that original concept. Whilst I am not particularly a learned person myself, left school with very few GCSEs, quite a disappointment to some of my teachers, I found myself in a position where I was able to go off and research and learn about things that interested me. And so that's what led me into spiritualism in the first place. And I think it's important that we should always try and learn and understand new things. I'm not necessarily saying that we should believe everything we read, especially in this day and age. I mean, we've got the biggest library in the universe sitting in our hand right now, with access to all wonderful information, but also a load of trite, because anybody can write anything now and pass it off as the truth. All you need is some fancy graphics and, it sounds like my podcast. All you need is some fancy graphics and a platform to post it from, and you can post anything. But my advice to anyone is and always has been, do your homework, do your research. Read up about it. Go to different sources. Read the positive view. Read the negative view. Read a neutral view. But then make up your own damn mind, for God's sake. I think this is where we tend to fall down as a society, is that we must do what everyone else is doing. Fortunately, in terms of spiritualism, we don't necessarily always have that problem on a grand scale, because if we were to do what everyone else is doing, they'd be literally throwing eggs into spiritualist churches like we first had when we first opened up in Littleport. Hasn't happened in a while, don't get me wrong, but there is still a lot of negativity towards this way of life. And it's when it gets really quite out there that puts people off from taking an interest. And I've got to say that in the wrong hands, this idea of starseeds has led people down the path of being put off, because I'm not against the concept of starseeds, so long as we understand and accept that it is a way of perceiving our connection to spirit, and not necessarily that, I was born on another planet and then, implemented into this physical shell in which I exist. It is a way of understanding that we are unique and different and from another place. It's called the spirit world. And I've argued this and discussed this and debated with this, and I don't expect to change anybody's minds, but look into it. Look at the reason, look at the logic, because there is logic in spirit. There is logic in spirituality. And I think we have to be very careful, if we wish to grow and progress this way of life, in how we portray those concepts. The idea of starseeds is a brilliant concept in its initial beginnings. a way of being categorized in terms of your mission on this earth given by spirit. We all have a mission in spirit, but it's this idea that we are somehow so unique and different and special that we are way beyond everyone else that tends to drive people away from us and against us. And that's a shame, really, because the whole concept of starseeds can be quite useful. The irony in terms of course, the names of these different classes of starseeds is that those locations, billions of miles away where they originate from, they use the name that we have been giving them over the last couple of 100 years by astronomers and such things. So if they do have names, it would be very different to what we've given them. But in terms of it being a concept, in terms of it being something that you resonate with, absolutely use it, absolutely work with it. But then don't force it down people's necks in terms of, oh no, this is absolute. Nothing in terms of our understanding of spirit is absolute. We get given these concepts and ideas to help us to understand the difference between the physical existence and the spiritual existence. And whilst we can never truly understand the absolute accuracy of what it's like to be energetic beings whilst we're inhabiting these physical shells, we can get an idea. And that's where these concepts come in to help us understand them, using metaphor and example and things that we would recognize and know. For example, the wings of an angel. Well, we know that those celestial beings don't actually have feathered wings, but they did have bright beaming lights radiating out of them, and they seemed to be able to move in ways that we physical beings couldn't, and it's almost like they were flying. And so therefore those glowing radiance that came from behind them were seen and perceived as wings. But angels don't really have wings, but they will use those as an example to identify themselves, and they will even use feathers to let you know that someone's around because we resonate with that image. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an actual angelic feather. But spirit will use whatever they can get their hands on to let us know that they are there. So long as we recognize that, what's the harm? But it's this idea that we need to be different, we need to be special, that I want to talk about, really. You see, the chances of you being you, very, very slim. You already are unique. You already are different. I was doing some reading and research, and there's a bit of a cheesy statistic, I must confess. And it's not entirely accurate either. But somebody sat and worked out that the chance of you being born as you in this physical form is 1 in 400 trillion. But that's only based on your parents meeting and getting together in terms of biology, if you get my sort of drift. We'll try not to speak about the icky things, but basically, so long as your parents meet and they meld, this is the statistic and what it's based on. What does 400 trillion look like, though? There was another thing that I read up on, and if we turn those statistics into time, if we were to use seconds as an anchor and as an example, so we all know what a second feels like. It's very, very short, very, very quick. Doesn't last very long, very fleeting. So if we were to turn 1 million seconds into days, it would work out as 11 and a half days, roughly. If we were to turn 1 billion seconds into, it would end up being years to calculate it properly. 1 billion seconds is 31.7 years. So we've gone from a million being 11 and a half days to a billion seconds is 31.7 years. So what does 400 trillion work out in seconds as kind of like a wider time? Well, stick your hats on because this one's a bit wild. 400 trillion seconds is 12,683,916.8 years. Over 12 and a half million years. That's nearly as long as Dave Lister was missing on the Red Dwarf. And you are just 1 second in 12 million years. You are unique and you are special. And that's something that we really ought to remember and recognize and consider in our daily lives. And I don't think we do. I don't think we appreciate that we are unique and special as we are enough. And that can be great comfort, and it can remove some of the frustrations when people are trying to tell you, you must do this and you must do that, and your heart's saying, well, actually, I prefer to do it another way. So long as it doesn't hurt anyone, spirit ain't going to give a damn. I certainly don't. So long as you be yourself and are true to yourself, I think that's really, really important to do. Because as individuals, we are far from ubiquitous commonplace or a pale repeating shell of repetition that we think we are. And that sheer statistical improbability that physical vessels we inhabit exists at all is a reminder that although we are limited in form, it's not so in function. The soul and the body intertwined are still highly unique in each and every single one of us. We are only limited by our thoughts and our feelings and the ideas and concepts that we take on board and cleave so hard to. And they're like chains of our own making. They lock us and limit us, and even and especially when they are seemingly strange or different. Our need to be different, but to also be a part of something at the same time, is just one example of those chains. Are we so afraid to be just us as we are? Or do we need to feel above and beyond and somehow special when we reach out to such things? I'm sure it's not always the case, but it's something we should always take on board, think about and consider. We quite often need something to express ourselves, and these things require example and comparison. That's what we need to do when we express ourselves. We use example and comparison, but only by realizing that our very existence, both individually and collectively, is so unique and special and improbable, and that we are all both wildly different and collectively the same, can we hope to move forward. So when I first came to find this way of life, it represented individuals united, acting for each other to bring all together and striving for a better world with no one left behind. Can some of the things that we say and do these days truly say that that is a concept that's represented now? If such concepts do not cover this one singular important factor of spirit, then they're frankly no better than the older, so-called older ways of working, and are basically a retelling of that conditional entry into the afterlife that we fight so hard to prove as being incorrect. We have to understand that we all have free will, so your free will impact mine, and sometimes I will have no control over that. But you also have the right to think in a way that's different to me, and I have to respect that, and hopefully you would respect the same. But if we do it with respect rather than, oh well, let's get over it and move on. No, we can learn by being courteous and polite to each other. And I think so long as we are always courteous and polite and recognizing that the way we say things can harm or heal, whether we realize it or not, and whatever our intention is, so long as we are cautious about how we discuss things, anything's on the table. We have some wonderful debates at Littleport where we've actually got one on Monday, as far as this podcast is concerned, tomorrow. We've got a debate on Monday. And those debates are wonderful because we can talk about some pretty heady things, but nobody gets grumpy or angry or upset with each other. It's so uplifting, and there's always some beautiful golden nugget said by somebody. And that's all part and parcel of the great joy of conversation, discussion, and debate. So my friends, be yourself, be unique, be who you are. You don't need all the polish and pizzazz or spectacle because you already shine bright. So get yourself out there, be yourself. And if anyone tells you that's not the way to do it, ask why. And if they can't answer, get on and be yourself. And that's all for today. It's lovely to have you join me here for my first podcast of this new series, Soul Perspective. If you've got any ideas on what you'd like me to talk about, give me a shout. I'm always interested in thinking and talking about new things. And have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. And for all of those that are out there in internet land, if I see you, I'll say hello. If I don't, reach out and say hello yourself. Because the more we connect, the better we become. Remember that community and communication are all derived from the same words. Well, thanks for joining me. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and if you feel the urge to continue the conversation, do so in the chat. And I hope you've enjoyed our time together today. Don't forget, tell your friends. And if you have any thoughts or ideas on what you would like me to discuss in the future, give me a shout out too. Until next time, my soul siblings, be well, be blessed, and let your soul see new perspectives every day.